The fluorescent lights of the mess hall buzzed like angry hornets as Lieutenant Commander Vera Ghoul Castellanos set her tray down at the corner table. She'd chosen it deliberately. Back to the wall, clear sightlines to both exits. Old habits from 6 combat deployments don't die easy, even in a training facility 8,000 miles from any active theater. The young pilots fresh from flight school watched her with that peculiar mixture of curiosity and condescension, reserved for instructors who don't fit their preconceptions. A woman in her late 30s, compact build, graying at the temples, with a call sign that sounded like something from a Halloween party rather than a cockpit. The whispers started before she'd taken her first bite. "That's our new aggressor instructor. Thought they'd send someone from Top Gun or Red Flag. Maybe she's admin. Probably flew transports." The voices carried across the utilitarian space with the carelessness of youth and inexperience. Vera kept her eyes on her food, methodically working through the institutional chicken and rice that tasted like cardboard and obligation. She'd heard worse. In 2019, over the Hindu Kush, enemy fighters had called her far more creative things over the guard frequency, before she'd sent 2 of them spiraling into the mountain peaks trailing smoke and regret. Lieutenant Bradley Hoffman, call sign Rookie, though he'd already logged 200 flight hours and thought himself invincible, stood up first. 6'2" of academy confidence and inherited wealth, his father a retired admiral, his grandfather a Medal of Honor recipient. The kind of pilot who'd never been told no, never been denied anything, never had to prove himself beyond the baseline of his last name. He approached her table flanked by 3 other nuggets, their flight suits crisp and unmarked by the wear patterns that come from actual sustained operations. "Ma'am," he said, the courtesy title wrapped in barely concealed mockery, "we were just wondering what aircraft you're qualified in, for training purposes." Vera looked up slowly, her fork still in hand. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds over the Pacific, met his without blinking. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just held his gaze with the quiet intensity of someone who'd learned that the loudest voices in the briefing room were rarely the most dangerous people in the sky. "You'll find out Monday," she said, her voice carrying a West Texas accent softened by years of clipped radio communications. "0800, flight line. Don't be late." The mess hall had gone quiet. 30 seconds of silence that felt like 30 minutes, every recruit suddenly aware they were watching something unfold, though they couldn't quite name what. Hoffman's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Looking forward to it, ma'am." The words came out wrong, too eager, too defensive. Vera returned to her meal without acknowledging his departure. Monday morning arrived wrapped in coastal fog, so thick the runway lights looked like dying stars in a gray void. The flight line at Naval Air Station Fallon stretched out like a concrete ribbon, flanked by 23 fighter aircraft in various states of readiness. The Nuggets arrived in a cluster, their swagger from the mess hall somewhat diminished by the pre-dawn cold and the weight of full flight gear. Hoffman led the pack, naturally, his boots striking the tarmac with the deliberate cadence of someone performing for an invisible audience. They found their assigned aircraft, 4 FA-18E Super Hornets gleaming with fresh maintenance, their weapons pylons empty for this training exercise, their paint jobs marking them as Aggressor Squadron birds with the distinctive dark gray scheme designed to simulate threat aircraft. The briefing room smelled of old coffee and jet fuel, scents that had permeated the walls over decades of pre-flight meetings. Vera stood at the front, her flight suit worn soft at the elbows and knees, her name tape faded from countless washings. On the board behind her, she'd drawn the training airspace boundaries and designated the engagement parameters. "Today's exercise is simple," she began, her voice cutting through the last murmurs of conversation. 4 versus 1, you're the Blue Force. You have numerical superiority, data link integration, and positional advantage. Your objective is to achieve a simulated kill on the Red Force aircraft. She paused, let them absorb that ratio. "I'm Red Force." The room erupted in poorly suppressed laughter, 4 against 1. Even Hoffman looked almost embarrassed by the mismatch, though his grin suggested he thought this was some kind of elaborate hazing ritual that would end with them buying her drinks at the officers' club. "Ma'am, with respect," he said, already standing, "isn't that a little unbalanced?" Vera's expression didn't change. "You'd think so, wouldn't you?" She tapped the board. "Rules of engagement are standard. Merge altitude is 20,000 feet. No vertical restrictions after that. Fox 2 parameters only, heat-seeking shots. You'll need good geometry and closure. I'll be in the F-16. That got their attention. Not a Super Hornet like them, but a single-engine F-16C Viper, older, lighter, with a thrust-to-weight ratio that made it a knife fighter's dream in visual range combat. The Nuggets exchanged glances, recalculating. Still 4 against 1, but now it was 4 heavier, more advanced aircraft against a smaller, more maneuverable opponent flown by an instructor they just spent 3 days underestimating. "We'll brief your flight leads on tactical frequency," Vera continued. "Standard combat spread on the ingress. Try to work in pairs. Use your altitude, use your sensors, don't get fixated." She looked directly at Hoffman. "And don't get cocky, the enemy doesn't care about your academy ranking." The Viper sat on the far end of the flight line like a coiled spring waiting to be released. Vera completed her pre-flight walk-around with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 3,000 times before, her hands tracing the familiar surfaces, checking for hydraulic leaks, examining the weapon stations, even though they carried only instrumentation pods for this training mission. The crew chief, a 20-year veteran named Rodriguez who'd seen instructors come and go like weather patterns, handed her the jet's maintenance log. "She's tight, Commander. Fresh engine, clean wings. They fueled her light like you requested." Vera nodded. Less fuel meant less weight, which meant better performance in a turning fight. She'd need every advantage against 4 opponents, even if they were inexperienced. The cockpit enclosed her like a second skin, every switch and dial positioned exactly where muscle memory expected them. She ran through the startup sequence without consulting the checklist, her hands moving in the choreography of countless engine starts. The Pratt & Whitney F100 turbofan spooled up with a rising whine that became a roar, pushing 45,000 pounds of thrust through a nozzle engineered for violence. She checked the radios, confirmed the weapon systems were in training mode, and called ground control. "Fallen ground, Ghoul 1 ready to taxi." The controller's voice came back immediately. "Ghoul 1, fallen ground, taxi to runway 31 via Echo, hold short." The call sign made the controller pause. Ghoul, not a name chosen lightly in military aviation, where call signs usually came from embarrassing incidents or personality quirks. This one sounded like it had been earned in circumstances that didn't make for funny stories at reunions. The Viper rolled forward, responsive to the slightest input, its nose gear steering precisely calibrated. Behind her, the 4 Super Hornets were completing their own startups, their twin engines producing a deeper, more rumbling tone. Hoffman's voice came over the tactical frequency, already positioning himself as flight lead. "Blue flight, check in." 3 voices responded in sequence, their call signs unmemorable: Sabre, Dice, Maverick. That last one made Vera smile grimly. Everyone wanted to be Maverick after that movie, but precious few had the actual stick-in throttle skills to back up the attitude. She'd find out soon enough who could fly and who just thought they could. The tower cleared her for takeoff first, giving her a 2-minute head start to reach the combat area. Vera advanced the throttle to military power, felt the jet strain against the brakes, then released them. The Viper accelerated down the runway like physics had become negotiable, hitting rotation speed in less than 8 seconds. She pulled back on the stick smooth, not yanking, and the nose lifted. The main gear left concrete, and suddenly there was nothing beneath her but 3 miles of air and Nevada desert. She climbed straight ahead to 5,000 feet before banking northwest toward the designated airspace, a box of sky 30 miles on each side where people learned hard lessons about the difference between simulators and reality. The morning sun was burning off the coastal fog, revealing the stark beauty of the desert below. browns and tans broken by ancient volcanic formations and dry lake beds that hadn't held water since the Pleistocene. Vera leveled off at Angel's 20,000 feet, and began a lazy racetrack pattern within the training area. Her radar showed 4 contacts departing Fallen, climbing in a tactical formation that suggested Hoffman had at least read the manual on basic fighter maneuvering. They were in a combat spread, about 2 miles between elements, giving each pair room to maneuver while maintaining mutual support. Not bad for nuggets, but manual knowledge and operational execution were 2 different things entirely, separated by the chaos factor that only came from someone actively trying to kill you, even in simulation. Blue flight picture, Hoffman called, using standard terminology to build situational awareness among his team. Single group, Bullseye 330, 40 miles, Angels 20, track southeast. Good radio discipline, proper brevity code. He'd identified Vera's position relative to the predetermined Bullseye reference point, an abandoned airstrip that served as the center of the training area's coordinate system. The 4 Super Hornets were approaching from the southeast, which meant they'd have the sun behind them during the merge. Smart. Elementary, but smart. Vera adjusted her course slightly, giving them what looked like a stable intercept geometry while actually setting up her first move. Blue flight has radar contact, single aircraft hostile. One of the other pilots' dice, she thought, called out. 16 miles neutral aspect. Vera's radar warning receiver chirped quietly, confirming they were painting her with their APG-79 AESA radars. Multiple threat emitters, different frequencies, making it harder for her to jam effectively. Modern fighters were flying sensor networks as much as individual aircraft, but sensors only told you where the enemy was. They didn't tell you what the enemy was thinking, what they were planning, or what they were capable of doing. Pressing for Fox 3, Hoffman announced, indicating a simulated radar-guided missile shot. Against a real threat at this range, it would be a valid tactic: fire from beyond visual range, let the missile do the work, avoid the danger of close-range combat. But this was a training exercise with different rules. Blue 1, negative, Vera heard another voice cut in. Row specifies Fox 2 only, visual range. The controller monitoring from the ground. Hoffman's acknowledgement sounded frustrated. Blue 1 copies, continuing. The range counter on Vera's display clicked down through single digits. 10 miles. 8, 6. The closure rate between her aircraft and the blue flight formation was over 1,000 knots, nearly 20 miles per minute. In less than 30 seconds, they'd be merged, transitioning from beyond visual range tactics to the swirling knife fight of close combat. This was where experience mattered, where 10,000 hours of flight time created instincts that couldn't be taught in a classroom. Vera's heart rate increased slightly, not from fear, but from the controlled excitement of a professional about to demonstrate their craft. 4 miles. Tally tally, Hoffman called, indicating visual contact. Red air, 10 o'clock high, 4 miles. Vera saw them too, 4 dark specks against the lighter sky, their formation already beginning to deform as each pilot started making individual decisions about geometry and weapons parameters. The merge was seconds away. 3 miles. 2. Vera waited until the last possible moment, then yanked the Viper into a vertical climb that pulled 7 gs and pinned her into the seat with the force of 7 times her body weight. The nose pointed straight up, afterburner lighting, trading airspeed for altitude in a zoom climb that took her from 20,000 to 35,000 feet in less than 20 seconds. Below her, the Super Hornets scattered like startled birds. Hoffman tried to follow her vertical, but the heavier Super Hornet couldn't match the Viper's thrust-to-weight ratio. His nose fell through the horizon before reaching 28,000 feet. The other 3 tried different tactics. One continued on his original heading, overshooting the engagement entirely. The other 2 attempted a pincer movement, breaking left and right to flank her predicted flight path. Amateur mistakes. They were reacting instead of anticipating, responding to what she'd done rather than predicting what she'd do next. At the apex of her climb, Vera inverted the Viper and pulled down into a split-S maneuver, diving back toward the fight with gravity adding energy. The ground rushed up 30,000 feet, 25-20. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 knots. She rolled wings level at 18,000 feet, directly behind the Super Hornet that had overshot. Dice. Range 6,000 feet. Aspect angle 0 degrees. She was looking directly at his tailpipes, the holy grail of air combat geometry. Fox-2, she called calmly, simulating a heat-seeking missile shot. The training instrumentation would register the kill automatically, but she followed proper procedure anyway. Dice's aircraft lit up with tone indicators and warning lights. He was dead in the simulation, required to leave the fight and return to base. 1 down, 3 to go. Blue 2 is killed in action, the ground controller confirmed. Departing the area. Vieira heard the frustration in Dice's acknowledgement as he turned away, climbing to a safe altitude for the return flight. The remaining 3 Super Hornets were now trying to bracket her, setting up a 3-dimensional trap with 1 high, 1 low, and Hoffman coming in from her left quarter. Better. They were learning. But learning in combat was a luxury measured in seconds, and Vieira had been teaching this lesson for 6 years. She lit the afterburner and accelerated away from the merge, not running but creating space to reassess. The Viper topped 600 knots easily, opening the distance to 3 miles before she chopped the throttle and pulled into a high-G barrel roll that scrubbed off speed and changed her flight path. When she rolled out, she'd repositioned herself perpendicular to Blue Flight's attack axis. Hoffman's voice came over the radio, tighter now, the casual confidence replaced by concentration. Blue Flight, let's bring it around. Sabre, take high cover. Maverick, bracket left. They were trying to use their numbers advantage properly. 1 pilot as insurance, the other 2 as active hunters. Good tactics require good execution, though, and execution required spatial awareness that couldn't be learned in a classroom. Vieira turned into their attack, denying them the easy stern conversion they wanted. In a turning fight, whoever pointed their nose at the opponent first usually won. She pulled hard, the Viper responding instantly, its fly-by-wire flight controls interpreting her inputs and adjusting control surfaces faster than any mechanical system could. The GS built up, 6, 7, 8. Her anti-G suit inflated, squeezing her legs and abdomen to prevent blood from pooling away from her brain. The edges of her vision grayed slightly, her body protesting the punishment. She'd done this 10,000 times. Her body knew what was coming and had adapted. She grunted through the strain, forcing blood upward, maintaining consciousness and awareness. Through the canopy, she watched Maverick trying to lead turn her, predicting where she'd be rather than following where she was. Decent idea, but his timing was off. He pulled too early, his radius too wide. Elementary mistake. Vieira adjusted her turn, tightening it just slightly, bleeding energy in exchange for turn rate. The Viper's nose tracked across the sky, across Maverick's flight path, settling on his aircraft with the inevitability of mathematics and physics. Fox-2, she called. The second kill. Maverick's radio call was 1 word, delivered with the stunned disbelief of someone who just discovered the gap between theory and practice. Dead. 2 minutes into the fight, she'd eliminated half their force. Hoffman and Sabre remained, and now they had to understand the truth of their situation. Numbers meant nothing if you couldn't bring them to bear effectively. Vieira checked her fuel state, still good. The light loadout meant she could sustain this for another 15 minutes if needed, but she wouldn't need 15 minutes. Blue 1, Blue 3, reform, Hoffman ordered. His voice had changed. The mockery from the mess hall was gone, burned away by the reality of being systematically dismantled by a pilot he'd underestimated. They were learning respect, but the lesson came with the bitter taste of simulated defeat. The 2 remaining Super Hornets came together in a defensive formation, flying a mutual support pattern where each could protect the other's 6 o'clock. Textbook defensive tactics. They'd stopped trying to kill her and started trying not to be killed. Vieira let them have the moment, circling at a distance like a shark assessing wounded prey. She could press now, but there was value in letting them think they'd found safety. The desert sun climbed higher, painting long shadows across the mountains below. At 30,000 feet, the sky was a darker blue, approaching the purple-black of the upper atmosphere. Vera loved this altitude, this place where Earth and space negotiated their boundary. She'd spent more time here than in any house she'd ever owned, more time in this cockpit than in any relationship that had promised permanence but delivered only absence. The Viper was constant. The sky didn't care about her gender, her background, or the opinions of academy graduates who'd never seen combat. Up here, physics was the only judge that mattered, and she'd learned to speak its language fluently. She keyed the radio. "Blue Flight, this is Ghoul 1. Recommend you press your attack. Time is a weapon you're wasting." Taunting them, yes, but also teaching. The clock was their enemy as much as she was. In a real engagement, fuel and weapons would be finite. Hesitation could be as deadly as aggression. Hoffman took the bait. Blue 1 engaging. The two Super Hornets separated again, but this time with more discipline. They set up a high-low split, with Sabre maintaining altitude advantage while Hoffman came in from below, forcing her to choose which threat to address first, dividing her attention. Much better. Maybe there was hope for these nuggets after all. Vera chose to engage the higher threat first. Altitude was potential energy, and potential energy could be converted to speed or maneuverability. She couldn't let Sabre maintain that advantage unchallenged. She pointed the Viper's nose up and climbed, accepting that it would temporarily put Hoffman in her vulnerable 6 o'clock position. A calculated risk. The two aircraft merged in a vertical scissors, each trying to force an overshoot by reducing speed at the critical moment. Vera watched Sabre's aircraft carefully, reading his energy state through the rate of his turn, the angle of his wings, the behavior of his thrust vectoring. He was good, better than the others. He didn't make the obvious mistakes, but good wasn't enough when you were flying against someone who'd been shot at for real, who'd felt the stomach-dropping terror of a missile lock warning and learned how to think through panic. She extended vertically again, then rolled inverted and pulled through, converting the maneuver into a downward spiral. Sabre tried to follow but had to pull out higher to avoid departing controlled flight. Amateur preservation instinct, staying safe rather than staying offensive. Vera completed her spiral and came out directly perpendicular to his flight path. Foxdew. The tone was almost apologetic. Sabre was the best of the four, and she just ended his day. Hoffman was alone now, and he knew it. His Super Hornet circled at Angels 25, trying to decide between pressing the attack or accepting defeat. To his credit, he chose to press. His radio call was clipped professional. Blue 1 continuing engagement. He dove toward her, gaining speed, trying to convert his altitude advantage into an offensive position. Vera respected the attempt. Most pilots, alone against an opponent who just killed 3 of their wingmen, would have played it safe. But Hoffman had his father's ego, and that ego demanded he at least try to salvage something from this disaster. They merged head-on at a closure rate that would have been lethal in a real engagement. Vera pulled vertical again, but this time Hoffman anticipated it. He pulled vertical too, matching her move, the two aircraft climbing together like mirror images. 7,000 feet per minute. 8,000. The airspeed bled off rapidly. Whoever maintained control longest would have the advantage. At 45,000 feet, both aircraft were approaching their aerodynamic limits, the air too thin for effective control surface authority. Vera felt the Viper start to shudder, approaching a departure from controlled flight. Hoffman's Super Hornet was in the same condition. This was a test of nerve as much as skill. Vera pushed the stick forward, unloading the G-forces, letting the Viper's nose fall through the horizon. The aircraft responded, trading altitude for speed. Hoffman held on for another 2 seconds, trying to prove something to himself or his father or the ghost of his grandfather. It cost him. When he finally pushed forward, he'd bled off too much energy. His Super Hornet's nose fell, but sluggishly, the controls mushy in the thin air. Vera already had 200 knots of airspeed advantage. She pulled hard, bringing her nose around, accepting that this would burn energy but knowing she had enough margin to make it work. The desert spun below, brown earth, white salt flats, the thin line of a highway cutting through emptiness. The Viper's nose tracked across the sky, across empty space, across the future position of Hoffman's aircraft. Lead computing, deflection shooting. The math was automatic, processed by a brain that had performed these calculations so many times they'd become instinct rather than thought. Fox 2, the final kill. Silence on the radio for 3 seconds. 5. Then Hoffman's voice, stripped of everything but exhausted acknowledgement. Blue 1 is dead. The 4 Super Hornets returned to Fallen, trailing the invisible weight of humiliation and newfound understanding. Vera landed 10 minutes later, her fuel state comfortable, her aircraft undamaged, her point made with the clarity of a theorem proven in 3 dimensions. The crew chief met her on the ramp, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes showing something else. Pride, maybe. Satisfaction that his aircraft had performed exactly as required. "How'd she do, Commander?" Rodriguez asked as Vera descended the ladder. Like always, Rodriguez, perfect. The debrief room was subdued when she entered. The 4 Nuggets sat in their assigned seats, flight suits still damp with sweat, their faces showing the particular exhaustion that comes from high-G combat and psychological revelation. Hoffman stared at the table in front of him. Vera took her place at the front of the room and opened the mission recording file on the display screen. "Let's talk about what happened," she began, her voice neither triumphant nor condescending, just professional. "First kill. Dice, you flew through the merge without repositioning. You assumed I'd stay defensive, and that assumption put you in a vulnerable position. In combat, assumptions kill you before the enemy does." She clicked through the recording, showing the overhead tactical plot of the engagement. 4 blue triangles representing the Super Hornets, 1 red triangle for her Viper. The geometry of advantage and mistake played out in 2-dimensional symbology that couldn't capture the G-forces, the tunnel vision, the sensory overload of actual combat. But it showed the decisions and their consequences with brutal clarity. Second kill. Maverick, your lead turn timing was early. You tried to predict my flight path, which is good, but you didn't account for my ability to adjust turn rate. You were solving for where I was going to be based on assumptions about my energy state, but you didn't confirm those assumptions with your own sensors. She paused, looked at each of them in turn. Third kill. Saber, you flew the best fight today. Your tactics were sound, your execution was clean. You lost because I had more experience in that specific type of engagement. That's not a character flaw, that's just where you are in your development. Saber nodded slowly, absorbing the feedback. Vera moved to the final engagement. Hoffman, you made a choice to press the attack even when alone and at a disadvantage. That took courage, but courage without tactics is just suicide with better PR. The room was silent. She let them sit with it for a moment before continuing. Here's what you need to understand. This wasn't about me being better than you. This was about you learning that the person across from you in a fight might have experience you can't see, capabilities you can't assess, and skills that weren't covered in your academy curriculum. You looked at me in the mess hall and you made assumptions based on what you saw, a woman in her 30s with gray hair and a weird call sign. You didn't ask about my background. You didn't wonder why I'm here as an instructor instead of still flying operational missions. You just assumed you knew everything relevant. She pulled up a new slide. It showed a personnel file photo from 2019, a younger version of herself standing in front of an F-16 CJ Wild Weasel. The aircraft was marked with 6 small silhouettes beneath the canopy rail, kill markings. I flew 117 combat missions over Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. I've been shot at by surface-to-air missiles 43 times. I've been in 17 engagements with enemy aircraft and I've never lost a single one. My call sign is Ghoul because after my 3rd confirmed kill, the enemy started calling me, the ghost that hunts at dusk, on their radio frequencies. Our intelligence section translated it, and it stuck. The Nuggets stared at the photo, then at her, recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Hoffman finally broke the silence. "Ma'am, I apologize for the mess hall, for underestimating you, for all of it." Vera nodded once. "Apology noted. Now let's talk about how you're going to fly better tomorrow, because we're doing this again at 0800 and I expect you to last at least 5 minutes this time." The debriefing continued for another hour, breaking down each maneuver, discussing alternative tactics. reviewing the principles that separated survival from becoming a statistic. By the end, the Nuggets were asking questions with genuine curiosity rather than defensive pride. They'd learned the first and most important lesson of military aviation. Everyone has something to teach you if you're willing to shut up and listen. When they filed out of the room, their body language had changed. The swagger was gone, replaced by something more substantial, a respect earned through demonstrated competence rather than demanded through rank or reputation. Hoffman lingered at the door. "Commander, can I ask what happened? Why you're here instead of still flying combat missions?" Vieira considered the question. She owed him nothing, but his humility deserved something other than dismissal. "Took some shrapnel from a SAM that detonated close aboard over Yemen. Nothing life-threatening, but enough damage to my spine that the flight surgeons grounded me from combat operations. So now I teach." The week progressed with a rhythm that would have been familiar to military aviators across generations. Morning briefs at 07:30, takeoff by 0800, one or two training sorties before noon, lunch, debrief, possible afternoon sortie, final debrief, paperwork. The Nuggets improved slowly, the way students always do when pushed by instructors who know the difference between challenging and breaking. By Wednesday, they lasted 8 minutes before Vieira eliminated all four. By Friday, they'd extended that to 12 minutes and actually managed to achieve one simulated kill on her, Saber, who'd finally understood how to use his radar's home-on-jam mode to counter her electronic warfare tactics. She'd smiled when the training system registered his Fox 3 shot, smiled because it was a genuine tactical accomplishment that showed he'd been paying attention. After the Friday debrief, she'd pulled him aside. "That HOJ shot was smart. You saw me jamming and you exploited it. That's the kind of adaptive thinking that keeps you alive." His grin had been worth more than any formal commendation. Word spread through the training squadron. The Nuggets talked, of course, sharing their war stories of getting systematically dismantled by an instructor who didn't fit their preconceptions. Other flight classes heard the stories and adjusted their attitudes accordingly. The mockery evaporated, replaced by cautious curiosity. By the second week, junior pilots were showing up to Vieira's lectures on defensive tactics, and the ready room was standing room only. She taught the way she flew, methodically, thoroughly, with no wasted motion or unnecessary complexity. "Defensive BFM is about energy management and angles," she explained, using the overhead projector to show engagement geometry. "You can't always avoid the merge, and you can't always start with an advantage. Sometimes you'll find yourself defensive with an enemy at your 6 o'clock, and you need to survive long enough to reverse the situation. That's what we're going to practice today." The training sorties became more complex. 2 versus 2 engagements, 4 versus 4, mixed aircraft types. Vieira flew some missions as Blue Force, letting the Nuggets see how an experienced pilot executed offensive tactics. She flew others as Red Force, giving them the experience of trying to kill someone who knew every trick they'd attempt before they attempted it. The repetition built skills. The debriefs built understanding. Slowly, imperceptibly, the inexperienced pilots were becoming competent. Hoffman, in particular, showed remarkable growth. His natural aggression, when channeled through proper tactics and tempered with patience, made him a dangerous opponent. By the end of the third week, he'd scored 3 simulated kills on her in a 2 versus 1 engagement, where he'd used vertical separation and timing to create opportunities rather than forcing them. The breakthrough moment came during a Friday afternoon sortie in the 4th week. Blue Flight, now consisting of Hoffman, Saber, and 2 other pilots who'd been rotating through advanced training, was executing a defensive counter-air mission against Vieira and another instructor pilot. The scenario placed them at a fuel and positional disadvantage, simulating the conditions they might face in an actual combat operation where nothing went according to plan. Vieira and her wingman, a former Navy captain named Torres with his own impressive combat record, pressed the attack aggressively, using a high-low split to divide Blue Flight's attention. For 8 minutes, it looked like another training exercise that would end with Blue Flight eliminated, and several teaching points about energy management and tactical patience. Then Hoffman did something unexpected. Instead of trying to engage both aggressors, he ordered his flight to ignore Tors entirely and focus all 4 aircraft on Vera. Blue flight, leads engaged Ghoul. Everyone else, bracket and support. It was tactically dubious. Leaving Tors free to operate would normally be suicide. But Hoffman had recognized something. In a training environment where the learning objective was to understand cooperative tactics, getting one instructor kill was worth more than losing to the other. He'd made a calculated sacrifice of tactical purity for educational value. And more importantly, his flight executed the order without hesitation. They came at her from 4 directions simultaneously, a coordinated attack that limited her options. Vera recognized immediately what Hoffman was doing and approved even as she defended against it. She pulled into a defensive spiral, trading altitude for turn rate, trying to extend away from the bracket. But every time she pointed her nose at one attacker, another was in position to threaten. She got 1 kill, Maverick, who pressed too aggressively and given her an easy fox-2 shot. But that left 3 attackers, and her energy state was low from the sustained defensive maneuvering. Saber came in from high, forcing her to pull vertical. Hoffman anticipated her move and positioned himself for her exit. When she rolled out, he was there, 2 miles away, nose on with good closure. Fox-2, he called, and this time there was no uncertainty in his voice. The tone was professional, almost casual, the sound of a pilot who'd executed properly and knew it. Vera checked her instrumentation. The training system had registered a valid shot. She was dead in the simulation. Ghoul 1 is killed in action, she acknowledged, smiling inside her oxygen mask where no one could see. Nice shot, Blue 1. Debrief in 20. Tors had eliminated the remaining 2 Blue Force aircraft while she'd been occupied, so technically Red Force won the engagement. But that wasn't the point. In the debrief, Vera pulled up the tactical plot and walked through Hoffman's decision process. "This is what I wanted to see," she said, highlighting the moment where Blue Flight had committed to the coordinated attack. "You recognized you couldn't win the whole fight, so you redefined the objective. You turned a 4 versus 2 where you were at a disadvantage into a temporary 4 versus 1 where you had local superiority. That's tactical flexibility. That's understanding that combat is about making the enemy face problems they can't solve, not about proving you're individually better than everyone else." She looked at Hoffman directly. "Your shot was clean. Good geometry, proper missile parameters, and you didn't get excited or rush it. That's the pilot I want on my wing in an actual fight." The compliment landed like a bomb in the quiet room. Vera didn't give praise easily, and everyone present knew it. Hoffman sat up straighter, and something in his expression changed. The last residue of academy arrogance replaced by the quiet confidence of earned competence. After the debrief, as the pilots filed out, Saber approached Vera with a question that had clearly been bothering him. "Commander, can I ask something personal?" She nodded. "Why Ghoul? I mean, I get the story about the enemy radio calls, but that doesn't explain why you kept it." Vera was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to share. "Because it reminds me of something important," she said finally. "The enemy thought I was a ghost, some supernatural thing they couldn't fight conventionally. But I wasn't a ghost. I was just a pilot who trained harder, studied longer, and refused to accept that my background or my gender meant I couldn't be as good as anyone else in the sky. The name reminds me that people will make assumptions about you based on what they see, and your job is to make them regret those assumptions." She paused, then added, "Also, it's a little bit funny to watch people try to figure out how to address me. Hey Ghoul sounds weird in the officers' club." Saber laughed, then asked, "The shrapnel wound. Is that really why you're here?" Vera nodded. 3 pieces of fragmentation from an SA-6 that detonated 100 feet off my left wing. Most of it hit the aircraft. 1 piece came through a gap in the panels and lodged near my L4 vertebra. The surgeons got it out, but the damage was enough that I can't handle sustained high-G operations anymore without risking paralysis. So now I teach. And honestly, this might be more important than flying combat missions. Every pilot I train right goes home safe. Every tactical lesson they learn here is one they don't have to learn while someone's actively trying to kill them. The months passed. Vera cycled through 4 more training classes, each one bringing a new crop of Academy graduates and OCS pilots who arrived thinking they knew everything and left understanding how much they still had to learn. Some learned faster than others. A few washed out, unable to meet the standards or unwilling to accept criticism. But most improved, slowly acquiring the skills and judgment that would keep them alive in an environment that punished mistakes with mechanical finality. Her reputation grew beyond the confines of Fallen. Pilots who trained under her and rotated to operational squadrons spread stories about the instructor who destroyed their egos and rebuilt them into something more functional. Detachment officers began specifically requesting assignment to Vera's training cycles. The naval aviation community, never quick to acknowledge excellence outside traditional channels, began to take notice. In November, she received a phone call from a captain at the Pentagon who asked if she'd be interested in developing a new tactical curriculum for advanced fighter training. She declined politely, explaining that she preferred to work directly with students rather than write policy papers for bureaucrats who hadn't flown combat missions since the 90s. The captain seemed relieved rather than offended, as if he'd expected that exact answer. "Figured I'd ask," he said. "But yeah, we need more instructors like you out there actually doing the work." December brought a cold snap that turned the Nevada desert into something almost resembling winter. Frost on the aircraft windscreens in the morning, breath visible in the ready room, the kind of cold that made pre-flight inspections miserable and reminded everyone that weather could kill as efficiently as enemy fire. Vera's current training class was scheduled to complete their final check rides before the holiday break, one last evaluation sortie that would determine whether they were ready to move on to their operational squadrons or needed additional training. Hoffman, who'd been held over to serve as an assistant instructor for the newer class, was scheduled to fly as Vera's wingman for the evaluation flights. It was a mark of how far he'd come, from arrogant nugget to trusted evaluator in 4 months. The morning brief was standard, covering weather, airspace restrictions, and evaluation criteria. The 4 pilots being evaluated looked nervous, which was appropriate. This wasn't a training sortie where mistakes could be debriefed and corrected. This was a pass-fail assessment that would determine their immediate future. Vera kept the brief professional but relaxed. "You've all been training for this for 4 months. You know what to do. Just fly your flight, execute your tactics, and don't try to be someone you're not. We're evaluating whether you're safe and competent, not whether you're the second coming of Chuck Yeager." The sorties launched in pairs, Vera and Hoffman evaluating 2 students at a time in complex tactical scenarios designed to stress their decision-making and execution. The first pair performed adequately. No brilliant maneuvers, but no dangerous mistakes either. They'd pass, go on to their operational squadrons, and hopefully continue developing. The second pair was more interesting. One pilot, a young lieutenant named Chen who'd struggled with basic offensive tactics early in the program, executed a textbook intercept and achieved 2 simulated kills through patient positioning and proper geometry. His performance was a testament to what focus and determination could accomplish when backed by quality instruction. His partner, however, made a critical error, pressing an attack despite being in a defensive position, taking a shot he couldn't support, and dying in simulation to Vera's counterattack. Fixation and ego, the 2 things that killed more fighter pilots than mechanical failure and enemy action combined. After landing, Vera pulled the struggling pilot aside for a private debrief. "You failed today's evaluation," she said directly, "not because you can't fly, but because you're still trying to be a hero instead of a professional. There's a difference. Heroes take risks that aren't justified by the tactical situation. Professionals take calculated risks that advance the mission objective." The pilot, call sign Blaze, which should have been a warning sign from the start, looked ready to argue, then thought better of it. Vera continued, "You're going to recycle through 1 more evaluation cycle. Use that time to figure out whether you want to fly fighters or whether you just want people to think you're the kind of person who flies fighters, because those are two different things." He nodded slowly, the resistance draining from his expression. "Yes, ma'am." After he left, Hoffman approached with a question. "How do you know when to recycle someone versus washing them out completely?" Vera considered it. "Blaze has the skills. He can fly the aircraft, he understands the tactics intellectually. His problem is judgment, and judgment can be taught if the student is willing to learn. If I thought he was fundamentally unsafe or unable to improve, I'd recommend he be transferred to a different community entirely. But he's not there yet. He's just immature, and sometimes another few months of training fixes that." Hoffman nodded, filing the lesson away in whatever mental catalog of instructor knowledge he was building. He'd make a good instructor himself someday, Vera thought. Maybe even a great one, once he'd accumulated enough operational experience to have stories worth telling. The holiday break came with its usual mixture of relief and melancholy. Half the squadron departed for leave, scattering to family homes and vacation destinations across the country. Vera stayed at Fallen. She always stayed at Fallen. Her apartment in base housing was functional but sparse, furniture that came with the unit, a few personal items, photographs from deployments on the walls. Her family was 3 states away, and the relationship was complicated by a decade of missed holidays and deployments. Her ex-husband had remarried and sent Christmas cards that she never responded to. Her father, a retired Air Force crew chief, still called every Sunday, but the conversations had become exercises in polite distance rather than genuine connection. This was the cost of the profession she'd chosen, paid out in small increments of isolation and absence. She spent Christmas Day in the Squadron Ready room, reviewing training curricula and planning the next cycle's scenarios. Rodriguez found her there around 1400 hours, carrying 2 plates of food from the base dining facility. "Figured you'd be here," he said, setting 1 plate down in front of her. "Turkey and fixings, the institutional version of holiday tradition. You know there's people who'd understand if you took a day off, right?" Vera smiled. "Where would I go, Rodriguez? This is where I am." They ate in comfortable silence, 2 veterans who understood that the military created its own kind of family, not built on blood relationships, but on shared purpose and mutual respect. Rodriguez had been at Fallen for 16 years, had seen hundreds of pilots come through, had kept dozens of aircraft flying through combinations of skill and sheer stubborn refusal to accept mechanical failure. He understood the particular loneliness of the instructor who'd sacrificed operational flying for the long-term impact of teaching. "You hear about the Marine pilot who washed out of F-35 training last month?" he asked after a while. "Came through here first about 2 years ago. You failed him on his initial evaluation, recommended he transfer to C-130s. Vera remembered. Hotshot kid who couldn't accept feedback, who thought criticism was personal attack. "Yeah, I remember." "What about him?" Rodriguez grinned. "He's flying Hercs now, and apparently he's damn good at it. Sent a letter to the Squadron Co. thanking you for washing him out of fighters. Said it was the best thing that ever happened to his career because he actually loves flying transport missions and he'd have been miserable as a fighter pilot." Vera absorbed that, feeling something warm settle in her chest. "That's a good outcome." "Most of them are," Rodriguez said. "You know that, right? Most of the pilots you train go on to have good careers. They don't all come back and thank you, but they remember what you taught them." New Year's came and went, marked by a subdued celebration in the officers' club where the pilots who'd remained on base raised glasses at midnight and made promises about flying better in the coming year. Vera attended, as was expected of senior instructors, but left after an hour. Crowds and celebrations had never been her natural environment. She preferred the solitude of early morning flight lines and the focused intensity of cockpit operations. January brought a new training class, the largest yet, 8 pilots instead of the usual 4, including 2 international students on exchange from Allied Air Forces. A British Royal Air Force flight lieutenant named Davies and a South Korean Air Force captain named Park, both experienced pilots in their own right who were learning American tactics and procedures to improve interoperability. Their presence changed the dynamic of the training, forcing Vera to explain not just what to do, but why American fighter tactics had evolved the way they had. "The reason we emphasize energy management over instantaneous turn rate," she explained during one lecture, "comes from Vietnam-era lessons about sustained engagement. Soviet doctrine emphasized point defense and high turn rates. American doctrine evolved to emphasize boom and zoom tactics that exploited superior thrust-to-weight ratios. Understanding the doctrinal why helps you adapt tactics when you're operating with coalition partners who learned different methods." The training progressed through familiar patterns, but with an intensity driven by the larger class size and the international students' determination to prove themselves. Davies was methodical, almost plodding in his approach, but he never made the same mistake twice, and his tactical execution was precise. Park was more aggressive, flying with a fluidity that suggested extensive experience in close-range combat. Both pushed Vera harder than the American students, not out of ego but from professional competitiveness. They wanted to return to their home countries able to honestly say they'd held their own against American aggressor instructors. By the third week, they'd formed the core of a frighteningly effective four-ship flight along with Hoffman, who was still serving as assistant instructor, and Sabre, who'd also been retained to help train the next generation. The four of them had developed an almost telepathic understanding of mutual support tactics, communicating in brief radio calls that contained more information than most nuggets conveyed in entire paragraphs. During one particularly intense 6 versus 4 engagement, they managed to eliminate Vera and 2 other instructors before losing any of their own aircraft. It was the first time in 2 years an instructor-heavy Red Force had lost a training engagement, and the accomplishment earned them something rare: genuine professional respect from the entire aggressor squadron. In the debrief, Vera pulled up the tactical plot and walked through the engagement with the entire squadron present. "This is what right looks like," she said, highlighting the coordinated maneuvers that had allowed Blue Flight to achieve local superiority at critical moments. They didn't try to fight 6 individual 1 versus 1 engagements. They identified the highest threat, which was me, and they coordinated to neutralize that threat first. That freed them to address the remaining threats from a position of advantage." She paused, looking around the room. "This is the standard. This is what every four-ship should aspire to. Perfect execution would have gotten all 6 of us before losing any of their aircraft. But this was close enough to perfect that I'm putting it in the training library as an example for future classes." The squadron commander, a taciturn captain named Reeves who rarely attended training debriefs, stood up from his position in the back of the room. "Commander Castellanos is being modest," he said. "What you just saw was 4 students defeating 3 instructor pilots with extensive combat experience. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because someone taught them properly." He looked directly at Vera. "This squadron is producing the best trained fighter pilots in the Navy right now, and that's directly attributable to the quality of our instruction. Well done." February brought orders that would change everything. The message arrived via official channels, printed on command letterhead with enough classification markings to make it interesting. Vera was directed to report to Naval Air Systems Command in Patuxent River, Maryland, for a 2-week consultation on advanced fighter tactics and training systems. The orders were deliberately vague about specifics, which usually meant the project was either highly classified or still in the conceptual phase where nobody wanted to commit details to writing. Rodriguez saw the orders when she brought them to maintenance control to coordinate her absence from the training schedule. "NAVAIR wants you for 2 weeks. That's either really good or you're about to be voluntold into something that'll make you wish you'd stayed at Fallen." Vera smiled grimly. "Probably the latter, but orders are orders." She spent the next week transitioning her current training class to Hoffman, who'd been officially designated as a qualified instructor after 6 months of apprenticeship. He was ready, had been ready for a while, and this would be good experience for him. Still, she felt the instructor's eternal paranoia about leaving students in someone else's hands. What if they learned bad habits? What if their development stalled? Hoffman noticed her hovering during the transition briefs. "Commander, I've got this. You trained me. Now let me train them." She forced herself to step back, recognizing her own control issues for what they were. "You're right, just remember. Energy management over instantaneous turn rate, tactical patience over aggression, and never assume the enemy is as stupid as they look," Hoffman recited. "I know. I was paying attention." Vera nodded, satisfied. She'd done her job. Now it was time to see what the Navy wanted from her on the other side of the country. The flight to Maryland was commercial. No tactical aircraft this time, just the indignity of airline travel with its cramped seats and recycled air. She arrived at Patuxent River on a Monday morning, was met by a lieutenant commander from NAVAIR who introduced himself as Harris, and was immediately escorted to a secure conference room where the details of her consultation would be revealed. What she found in that room would become the second act of her career, though she didn't know it yet. 4 senior officers, 2 civilian contractors, and a wall-sized display showing telemetry data from aircraft she didn't immediately recognize. Harris made the introductions, captains and commanders whose names she promptly forgot, contractors from defense firms she'd never worked with, and then the briefing began. The project was designated Next Generation Fighter Training System, and its goal was to develop an AI-assisted training platform that could provide